Talking landscape photography with Kristen Fletcher and Cowan.
Let me tell you, we have got a cracker of a show today. It's myself, Christian Fletcher, and all the way from the United States. When you think about Photoshop and think about editing, you probably think of this one person, and that's Julieanne Kost. Julieanne, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Hey, Julieanne. It's great to see you again. It's been how many years since we were together last?
I think it's probably been 5, just because I'm adding 2 years to everything, because as I get older, I just can't seem to recollect.
No, I understand that feeling perfectly well. So thanks so much for being with us. It's great to talk to you, because when I did see you in New Zealand, I hadn't heard much of you in the past, and at that stage I was like, oh, okay, Julieanne Kost, who is she? I've seen this woman, and she's does something with Adobe and other things, and she's very creative and stuff, and I didn't know that. And when I met you, and you went on stage, and then you had everybody just eating out of every word that you said, I thought, oh my God, I've met probably the best presenter I've ever experienced in my whole time, 29 years in photography. So that's pretty good. I've seen 2 people, and you're one of them, and you were the
best. I thought maybe the bar was a little low there.
Lightroom and Photoshop are essentially boring subjects. How do you make that interesting?
They're not boring subjects. They really aren't. So, they're linear subjects, right? And I think sometimes that's really difficult, because as you're trying to teach someone them, it's very step by step. And if you miss a step, then it can be very frustrating. So, but I don't think they're boring. And my goal is always to try to put out like a larger concept that, when I teach, I don't necessarily want people writing down every single step by step, because they're going to find their own workflow. I just want them to know what's possible. And then if they know what's possible, they at least they can always go find a menu later on.
So Julieanne, you've how long have you been doing this? How long have you been a creative? How long have you been teaching for Adobe and other people?
So I've worked for Adobe since 1992. I started in technical support, which might seem odd, but it actually was quite a enlightening experience for me.
Lots of people complaining, ringing, I can't get Photoshop to work. What is this stupid program? What's these layers things? What are these layers you're talking about? I don't understand. Click.
Well, okay, so I'm sure you and I have both called, everyone's called technical support at one point in their life because they don't understand something. And so as long as you understand, and I do have a degree in psychology, so as long as you understand that the person who is calling, something's gone wrong, right? Yeah. So you have empathy right away, because if you've ever called someone when something's gone wrong, you know how frustrating it can be, because they probably don't even know the questions to ask, right? They might be asking a question that it's not the wrong question, it's just the only question they know to ask. So I actually enjoyed all that problem solving. It was kind of fun for me. I just tried to put myself in their shoes. I've been there. We've all picked the wrong layer, or not know why something isn't working the way we think it is. I guess the most part is every time I seem to get frustrated with either program, I'm like, why isn't it working the way it should be? Or then I really realize that it's user error. It's my fault in the end. And I kind of go, so I don't really like to eat crow very much. And so it always humbles me.
You don't actually admit to being wrong, do you? Because I did that the other day. It was something that my wife will end up hearing about this, but she asked me to do something, and I said, no, it's not working. It's just, there's something wrong and it's broken, blah, blah, blah. And then she went to find out, she made phone calls to technical support, same thing we're talking about. And she was on the phone for, 3 hours, probably 4 hours total, trying to get through. It was all about the internet. And what I had done is I actually plugged some other cord, some cable, into the back of the gigabit switch. I pulled it out of the modem, and it basically screwed up the internet, and it wouldn't work. And then I thought, she goes to me, you haven't done anything to the modem, have you? And I said, no, it's just stupid. The internet, the provider, they're not doing their job. It's not working, and it's Telstra, it's whatever. Anyway, I thought, I'll just go check that thing, and I unplugged the cord, and then I said, hey, honey, guess what? The internet's back on.
now you've told the story,
Yeah, so there you go. So now we know that I'm not very good at technical support, and I don't have any empathy.
So I will just say then that, before I give a talk sometimes, because there's a lot of things to remember with Photoshop, and it depends on who you're talking to. Like some people want to know about fonts, and some people want to know about libraries, and some people want to know about layers. So I will actually go back, like if it's a difficult subject, like actions or droplets, and I will watch my video before I give my talk, just so I can remember it. But that's not the worst part. The worst part is when I actually see myself talking and I'm saying something that I don't know, and I've never known it. And I can't believe I'm saying it because I'm like, I have never known that information. So we all can only keep a certain amount of information in our brains, and I have no issue with that. As long as I know where to get the information, then I don't have to keep it in my brain.
Oh, that's good to know, because I've got all these video tutorials that I have on my training site, and I couldn't even tell you how to do most of those things. I'd have to go back and watch the videos and stuff. Oh, what did I do? Okay, yeah. So yes, you're right. You learn these things and you retain them for a certain period of time. Then if you don't use them all the time, you forget. And I think that's the problem. Not the problem with Photoshop. It's the problem with people, and that we don't spend enough time on these tools. And it's like anything. If any sort of tool or any craft, if you're not doing it all the time, you'll lose it. And which is great for us, because that means that we get to teach more people, because they have to come back to remember how to do it all, which is fantastic. So you've been known for your teaching and Photoshop and all that, but you're also very creative, and I follow you on Instagram, and you're always coming out with something new and interesting. So where did that creative side come from?
Well, I'm not sure where creativity comes from necessarily, but I'm always trying to experiment with things. Like I knew a long time ago that I always wanted to do photography. So my mom is an artist, and my dad was an engineer, but he did photography on the side, and he was very, very technical with his own system and all of that. And then my mom was super creative, and she drew and she painted and she did designs and everything. So I was always in a very creative environment growing up, and they really, really encouraged it. But they were pretty smart in that they knew that I really didn't like to take photographs for other people. So I would be much better off getting a degree in something else, I think, than photography. But for me personally, working for Adobe, and I'm so fortunate that they were in my backyard and that I got my foot in the door, because, working here has enabled me to get so close to the tools. I have access to the engineers, and at the same time, I can then create my own artwork for me. And to me, that's a huge luxury. Yeah,
fantastic. So your degree in psychology, how does that help your photography? Does that make you understand your thoughts and emotions and other people's thoughts and emotions? Can you make images that will make them feel better because you know how they tick?
Well, I don't know about, I've always thought about photography. Well, they go really well together, right? So I use my degree in psychology to try to make sense of my dreams. That's one of the things, and that's how I started, was with these composite imagery, right? And then I try to use my psychology in order to gain kind of some insight into my behaviors and maybe become a little bit more self-aware. And I think that's really helpful just with my straight photography, because I think a lot of times photographers, myself included, like at the beginning, I was just making images, but I was never trying to figure out what the relationship between those images is. And it really wasn't until I started actually making a book at the end of each year. Just because Lightroom had a book module, I thought, well, you know what? I should put together a book for the year. It actually, it forced me to look at all my images as a body of work and become a little bit more critical about, because it doesn't do me any good if I just say, oh, I like that when I post it to social media. That don't really learn a lot. But once you look at the body of work and you start looking at the images that didn't work, I actually think that made me a much better photographer, because I was like, well, gosh, I do that over and over again and it just never works. So maybe I should, stop hitting my head against that wall.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, that's interesting.
Julieanne, what was the inspiration behind the Colour of Place, your recent stuff?
Well, it was one of those times where I noticed that as I went to certain locations, I was making better photographs. So, because I travel so much for Adobe, I end up in different locations. And like when I went to Berlin, I shot for one day, but I ended up with maybe a dozen images that I really liked. And then I went to the US Virgin Islands, and I didn't like any of the images that I took there. So I started thinking, what is it? Is it as obvious as is it the mood that I'm in? Is it the state of mind that I'm in? Is it the work that I'm doing while I'm there? Is it higher pressure or low pressure? And really I started looking at it all and I was like, gosh, you know what is really common is the color palette here. Someone has described my color palette as somewhere between doom and gloom. So I would say a little bit of subdued color palette, maybe not really bright, vibrant colors. And you just look and I was like, well, gee, Berlin in, March, when it was snowing out, that's pretty subdued. And then you go to the U.S. Virgin Islands, beautiful tropics in, May. And of course, it's going to be a different color palette. And I just started thinking like, okay, first of all, does each location have a color palette? And then as I delve in a little bit further, thinking about that, I started thinking, okay, so I'd always just thought about the colors in the photograph that I'm taking. I didn't really think about how the environment affects you during that process of making images. So now all of a sudden you start thinking, okay, well, could it be as simple as, if I'm not making good photographs, could I just change my environment? And might that be enough to to change how it is that I'm, does it put me in a better creative space? Because it's kind of silly thinking back on it. It seems really obvious in hindsight. Like if I smell gardenias, I think of my grandma's pool. Or if, you see a certain color yellow, you might be reminiscent of the kitchen or bright, shiny place that you went in grade school or something. But the point being is that, of course, the environment affects how we behave. And I just hadn't really thought about it as far as the act of making a photograph.
You touched on this before, and this is a way for you to put some of the dreams and feelings into your head into a photo. Is that what it is for you? Because it's quite interesting work. You've just got vertical lines of color, and it's quite amazing. So I haven't seen that before.
No, I haven't seen it.
Well, thanks. I just wanted to remove the content from the color. And so to blur it, to me, that was the easiest, the simplest way to do it. I have other ideas for the project now that I've done it, because, everything changes, right? I was like, I'm going to make this objective color palette for this location. And of course that didn't happen because everything's subjective, right? Like when I was there, the temperature, the weather, morning, night, what I photographed, what I didn't photograph. Then out of all the images I took, maybe I took 600 images, then I'm only picking 50 images. So, and then from those 50 images, I'm only taking a slice of the image. And then in that slice, I'm rearranging them. So all of these different variables means that really, I don't think I came up with an objective color palette, but I did come up with a color palette that represented what I experienced while I was in that location.
Is this still a work in progress? Or I guess what I want to ask is where to from here?
So when I was first doing it, right now with Adobe's schedule, like we're pretty intense as far as the it used to be we would update the products once every 18 months. And now we're on this kind of continual updating with subscription and everything. So for right now, the shorter assignments are working really well for me. And that was really just a personal project. So I thought that, and for me, with personal projects, I have found, because for me personally, I work much better in a structure. So I work really well if I define a project, and then if I limit the scope. Like if you told me just to go out and take, 10 pictures of something, I would go crazy because I'd be like, I don't even know where to start. But if I define the project, and in that case, it was like, all right, I'm going to make 25 of these, and they're each going to contain 50 images. They're going to be from around the world. Excuse me. And then I'm going to limit it so that I have a time frame. So I gave myself 6 weeks to do it. And then I committed to that by saying, all right, well, I'm going to tell the social media folks at Adobe that if they want to write a blog post about this, I will have these images on this day. Because otherwise, that project could have dragged on for years, right? And I mean, if you think about it, if there's 50 different color strips, the number of ways that you can rearrange that, like if you think of license plates, right? It's 3 with 64 zeros.
Yeah. Is
the number of different ways. And of course, every time, I did like 3 or 4 for each one, and I was like, all right, finally, you just have to commit to it and be done with it.
Are you going to do something new with it? Are you going to do, horizontal lines or squares, or is that it for the project?
Okay, so here's what I was thinking would be really cool, but I don't know. I have to look into the technology. So, there's virtual reality and then there's augmented reality, right? So what I was thinking was, augmented reality is like when you take your phone somewhere and you have an app and you point the app in a direction and you see a dinosaur or something, like someone's put something in that reality, or Pokemon or whatever it is. I was thinking it'd be really cool if someone went to one of these different locations, or they could make their own locations, and they could take a picture and somehow they could hashtag it or something, and that would go up into the cloud, and then somehow, in the cloud, it would cut a strip from it and blur it, and then it would add it to one side of the panorama. Wow. And then it could be this live feed of any location with this color or place. But I'm not sure if the technology's there, and I'm not sure, I think it's a good idea, but sometimes I just have to go, okay, well, that is a good idea, but maybe I'm not the one to make that happen.
Yeah, so you're thinking all these things that you're thinking out of the box, and you're trying to define what photography is and where it's going. I think about this all the time as well. I think, because I make my living out of selling photographs out of my gallery, but I'm just wondering. And I know galleries are closing down all over the world because people are more used to buying online, and they're comfortable with that now. With blockchain technology, you know that you're getting something authentic. What do you think is going to be the future of making images? I mean, it's like, say, if we're in regard to an artist making an image, how do you think they're going to sell it in the future? Do you think is there still room for people making beautiful prints to put on walls, or is it going to go to high definition screens, or are we going to just look at it on our phones and that's it from now on, or what do you think?
So I'm tempted to just say, I don't know. But then when people say that to me, when I ask someone a question and they say, I don't know, and I say, well, I know you don't know, but if you did know, what would it be? Right? Because it kind of puts them off guard. So if I don't know, but if I did know, I still think, and I really hope that in the future, because I'm kind of making a distinction here. There's a photograph that is the object, right? It is the artwork. It is what I have hanging on my walls. It is what I want to live with. It is an image that brings out something in me that I connect with, right? And I think there will always be room for that. When they buy it in a gallery or online, I don't even know if that, I'm not sure if that matters as much as, the nice thing about a gallery is you have the whole experience and you meet the person, and that can be very meaningful. But there might be times where I want an image because it resonates with me, and yet I know I'm never going to get to that gallery, and so I do want to buy it online. So the actual where the transaction takes place, I'm not sure is as important as maybe the fact that, and of course I don't have a gallery, so I could be wrong on all of this. But then there's also photography as just a means of communication. Instead of writing something and telling you about an experience, I'm just going to show you what I experienced. And that to me is sometimes a little bit more transient. And it was like a little comment, not a novel. It might not be something you want to live with. Whereas to me, I absolutely love photography. So I think both can exist.
Yeah.
Julieanne, you see lots of photography. If you had to nail it down to one genre, what's your favorite genre?
I'm kind of all over the place because I'm trying to think of what's in my house. What's interesting is so much of it is black and white. I'll tell you that. A lot of it is I really like Keith Carter's work. I've always been a fan of Jerry Ullsman and also Maggie Taylor and John Sexton. I respect all these people who really know how to print. To me, it's very, very difficult. So I always vowed that as I walk out of my house, I have original prints on the wall because I want to hold myself to that standard because they are so good.
Do you do your own printing at all? Do you have a printer at home?
I do my own printing. Yeah. For any work that I'm selling. So I do sell through a gallery in Atlanta called Lumiere. So any of the limited edition prints, I will do all that printing.
Time for the top 3 tips. To be sure.
I was hoping you could say that again, mate. We just couldn't understand your accent.
Time for the top 3 tips.
Christian, what are the top 3 tips you want to ask Julieanne?
Well, I just would like to know 3 things that can help people be more creative. Because we all suffer from. We grab our camera, we walk out into the environment, we walk down the street, we walk into the bush, we put it in front of we stand in front of a person and we want to take a photo of that person. What are things, let's say 3 things that you could enlighten us on about being more creative? So
for me personally, it's reading. I want to be a creator of content, right? And not necessarily as much of a consumer of content. I mean, sometimes it takes both. I don't consider reading as much of a I'm consuming content, but I'm consuming words, and that forces my brain and my imagination to kick in order to imagine that. I think that's very different from sitting down and watching television where there's a story, but someone else has already put the characters to that story and created everything for you so that you're just watching it. So for me, I read all the time, and I keep journals. They used to be all handwritten, but now, if you use a Kindle or whatever to read, you can just highlight stuff, and then you can go online and you can download all those notes. So anytime that I'm reading and I read something that causes or evokes some kind of emotional, response in my mind, or I visualize something, I definitely highlight that. And so I never feel like I'm out of ideas. So I never feel like, I just don't know what to photograph. All I have to do is go back to any of those documents. I keep them all in Evernote, so I have them with me everywhere. And I can just start reading, and I'll read a quote, and the quote will trigger something, and then I'll be able to go out and photograph that. Even if it's just a word, or drifting. You could take a word and just go outside if you're stuck. The other thing I would do is when I do go out, because the structure and the map is really important to me, because I am a linear person, is I do try to plan ahead, right? Because that, for me, I would photograph something very differently if I knew, for example, if I just wanted to create an exhibit, then I just really want those hero shots, those big, impressive, epic landscapes, which I'm not actually very good at. I'm much better at the minimal, very graphic kind of photography. But if I was going to, if my goal was to make a book, then I would also need all those little supporting images in order to kind of fill in all of the details. And then just to work out all the time, and not physically, but mentally and creatively. So I find that, whatever project you can give yourself, and I've been giving myself a lot of little projects because there's no pressure, right? So if I don't know how to shoot a waterfall, like moving water, I just told myself last year for 1 year I was going to take my tripod. I was just committed. Anywhere that I traveled to that had water, I would take my tripod and I would take a long exposure of it. Or when I was actually, that same reference to Berlin, that one day that I shot, it was like, I'm just going to bring my tilt shift lens. That's all I'm going to bring. That's limiting my project. So again, I define the project. I've got one day in Berlin. I'm going to limit that project by just shooting this one lens, and I'm going to commit to it by, booking the hotel for another night. So now I'm financially committed to it. And by doing those three things for me, it really forces me to do projects. And even though they're just for me, it's constantly keeping me engaged and learning and trying new things. And I think that's super important because we get stuck in ruts otherwise.
Yeah, they're great tips. They're so different to what I would even have thought of. So I think that's going to help everybody out. And I can't wait to go and start reading some books again. I've read all the ones in high school, To Kill a Mockingbird and all that sort of stuff.
Well, they don't have to be profound books. They really don't.
Oh, that's good, because I've got some Simpsons comics there and I could probably have a read through. There's probably some good stuff to be seen there and had from those. So, yeah.
I think a lot of it just has to do with giving ourselves permission as well, like to be okay with our process. I mean, it took me a lot of years to just be like, you know what, this is the kind of photography that I make. I don't have to make photography like that. In fact, I can't. And you need to be true to yourself when you're out there photographing. And the whole knowing your tools, I mean, that's one of the things that, because I do talk to a lot of people who are learning Photoshop and Lightroom, there's nothing more frustrating to me than to watch a photographer who has like phenomenal ideas and is super creative, but they can't execute because they don't know their tools.
So Julieanne, where to from here? You've done some amazing things, but what's your next project?
Well, one thing we didn't really talk about at all was Photoshop or Lightroom. So I guess I would suggest that people go to my blog and maybe check that out, or it's blogs.adobe.com/jkost, or maybe they don't know that if they subscribe to the Creative Cloud for Photography plan that they get a free portfolio, as many portfolios as they want using Adobe Portfolio. So maybe those should have been my tips, not the...
Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, that's another good tip, but that's okay. We can have you back, and you can tell us all about those sort of things down the track.
We chatted with the goddess of photo editing, Julieanne Kost. We touched on her project, which is called Colour of Place. Julieanne, if it's okay with you, do you mind if we post one of your images on our Instagram?
That would be lovely.
All right, we'll do that. If you want to check that out, just do a search on Instagram for Light-Minded Podcast, and that's 3 words. We also talked about today. We talked about the where photography is going in terms of printing, and also Julieanne's idea for an augmented reality, which I found really quite interesting.
Very augmented.
All right, Julieanne, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Talking landscape photography with Kristen Fletcher and Cowan.